creating the sacred spaces doesn't mean that we say this is the world I've built and it's always going to be the same. Instead, it's turning to the altar, or going out into nature, or opening the journal, or wherever we know we find that numinous seed within ourselves, going there and then saying, how do I offer myself today?
Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Christina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life. Hello, everyone. We have an amazing episode for you today. But before we jump into it, I just wanted to give you the heads up about the Archetypal Tarot School, which just opened its doors last week. So this is a 10-week intensive for tarotists designed to guide you through an archetypal and Jungian depth psychological approach to the cards. So it teaches students not just to memorize what the cards mean, but to drop into their depths and truly understand their meaning, the real juicy part of the cards, the archetypal heart. It is a program guiding you to access the mystical truths not only within the cards, but also within yourself. Now, there is so much in this course, including archetypal numerology and court cards as complexes and the 4 cognitive functions and the 4 suits. But some of our most important course goals include becoming fluent in the fundamentals of Jungian depth psychology and archetypes, mastering archetypal interpretations of all 78 cards of the tarot, understanding how to read the cards as a psycho-spiritual roadmap to individuation, and learning how to read with clarity, flow, and wisdom by learning the greater communication of the cards and enhancing your symbolic literacy. And I know that's a lot, but I hope that makes you feel as excited as I do anytime I get to talk about it. So if you are interested in exploring more about the school, class begins on September 11th, 2023, and you can register at persephonessister.com or click the link in the show notes, and I really hope to see you there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 18th episode of Soror Mystica. Today, we are going to be exploring the creation of sacred space, which takes us slightly out of the realm of holding a particular symbol in our mind's eye, but delves us into a realm where we talk about maybe the practical approaches to the symbolic, which feels like a nice shift. So I'm excited to do this for us. And before we jump in with our reading shares and our ideas about sacred space, I do want to say that this is, yes, our 18th episode. It's really delightful
We're
to
legal.
be. Yes, that's great. We're legal now. And in that vein, you know, our ideas continue to flourish. We keep having more and more fun, you know, working on this project together. And so as we continue to grow and expand, we would love it if you would be able to leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you are using to listen to your podcasts. This is definitely going to help us find more people or have more listeners find us, and will allow us to keep growing in our work together as we uncover all of these symbolic, beautiful kind of things, these gems. So
Indeed.
yeah, if you feel called to do so, that would be amazing. And yeah, I think that's my tiny request as we open up here.
Also, if you didn't know, we also have a Patreon. And Patreon is a thing in the world. Some people love it, some people hate it, but it's really great for getting cool things. So if you check out our Patreon, we actually have some really sweet offerings over there that Christina and I put a lot of work into, a lot of thought into, and they're really lovely. So yeah, you can find that on our website too. So that might be something for you.
And that helps us grow as well, because I think that eventually we would love to be able to have some support with maybe mixing and mastering the show or producing it.
Mhm.
And any contribution will help us make the show more professional, more supported, and just a little bit more stable in our own practices. So
Mhm.
thank you everyone for listening to
Make the dream come alive.
that. Good.
Loopy.
So with that in mind, that is all wonderful. And what are you reading right now, Mariana?
So, I am reading, I'm going to sound extremely snobby. I'm reading The Sacred and the Profane, The Nature of Religion by Mircea Eliade.
How dare you?
It's just the name makes me sound snobby just by saying it.
I think it sounds great.
It's cool. So this book I've heard about so much from reading Jung, and I know that Jung was really familiar with Eliade's work, and basically it's a deep dive into the difference between what is sacred and what is profane. And by profane we mean like mundane, right? Like to the opposite of sacred. And so it's very very interesting. It's philosophy, right? But it's actually not. It's understandable philosophy. As much as I sound like I think I'm a philosopher on this show, I actually am not great at philosophy. Philosophy is hard for my brain.
This is not true.
It's
You are good at
really
it.
true. I almost failed that one philosophy class that I took at the grad center. That's a lie. I got an A minus,
The
but I
Enlightenment class?
no. That was
Did you
fine.
say
That
you
was
almost failed and you got an A minus?
yes.
Mariana.
But no, listen. Let me
What
defend
what in
myself.
the overachiever are you talking about?
Okay. Well, no, see, I took this class. I was very ambitious. It was called Virtue and Will in Medieval Philosophy, I think it was the name of the class. And so I was like, that is amazing. I'm going to do it. And it's going to be so great. And then he gave us, like, on day one, we're reading Aquinas, and we're reading just people I don't even remember anymore. And I was like, what in the holy hell are they talking about? And I had absolutely no comprehension of what was happening. And the class had like 4 people in it, of course.
Oh my God.
And so, like,
Stressful.
it was one of these professors who wanted a lot of engagement in the class and like discussion. And I could not freaking understand. I was like, like virtue is virtuous. I don't understand why it's so complicated and why people have so many different ideas about it. And so I had a like conversation with the professor and basically confessed, I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't have taken this class. And he would like I think he just felt bad for me. So he would like give me back my papers like, that was a very good try. And so he'd give me good grades for trying. But I was not a philosopher. Everyone else in this class was getting a PhD in philosophy, and here I came with my little stupid self.
Hmm.
Never have taken a philosophy class outside of high school before,
Mhm.
thinking that I was going to be great at it, and I was very very overwhelmed. That being said, I love the idea of philosophy. So I like this book because I can actually understand it, and I can like it. Like I might have to read a passage a couple times, but like I get it. So I'm highly recommend. It's worth a read, and we'll talk about it today in the as we discuss sacred space for sure. What are you reading?
I just want to say, I think philosophy classes are difficult because
Yeah,
there's usually no context, and philosophy exists in a continuum of intellectual history. And if you aren't familiarized with like the context, I don't think it's easy to just jump into Thomas Aquinas and be like, clearly I understand what's going on here.
I kept feeling like, don't we already know this? I
Right.
don't understand why this is what we're arguing. That was my problem. Is like there's a little bit too much earth sign in me and not enough
Mhm.
air sign to balance out and like water in my life. So I was just very much like, yeah, we know that it's impossible to be perfect. Why
Yeah.
is Aquinas talking about this for thousands of pages? Like, yes, we know that there is no such thing anyway. So it was very hard for me to argue with philosophy, is just arguing a lot of these like extremely subtle nuances.
Yes, totally. I
And
mean,
that was,
it's like being a lawyer. It's like,
yeah.
it's really, really technical a lot of the time, which is why I prefer something like phenomenology, which is way
Yeah.
more kind of ephemeral. And I'm probably insulting phenomenologists, but I just think it's way more about experience than
Well, yeah.
the cerebral stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
I want to talk about a phenomenologist today when we talk about sacred space. But what I'm reading, I'm still working on Swan's Way, everyone, and it's going
Beautiful.
great. I have not abandoned
Good.
it. I have not gotten overwhelmed by it. I have totally surrendered to Proust's form, and I'm really enjoying it whenever I can sink my brain into it. So stay tuned. I really hope to finish it by the fall. It's really not that long. It just takes a long time to get through the kind of first chunk of it, I think. And then I'm getting to the point where there's like a novel inside of this novel. Did you know
Yeah.
that? So I did
I've
not.
heard things that have
Hmm.
scared me away from
Yeah.
reading it.
Yeah. So I'm finally getting up to the place where I can tell that we're going to be tuning into this whole other story, and I'm like, oh god, but it's okay. It's going to be great. I'm really loving it for my poet brain. Just what images it
That's so
gives
good.
me, super transcendent. So anyway, okay, so we are bumbling along here, just chatting away, and I want to open us up into this consideration of sacred space
Hmm.
because we live in a world that is actually it's so interesting. I think that we're in a unique position as people who seek spiritual purpose right now because I think that a lot of us were raised in contexts that were maybe monotheistic in their
Hmm.
orientation,
Hmm.
as were our parents and their parents. And that was just kind of the law of being a person, was that you needed to belong to some kind of church or temple or religious orientation that
Yeah.
was very dead set on going to church and being in space. I went to church every single Sunday and
Hmm.
sometimes for other feast days when I was growing up. And and I was raised Roman Catholic. And that was part of the deal. And it was part of the ritual of the week, part of like the kind of flow of each week that we had. And even though I hated waking up early to go to church on Sundays and I felt like it was really unfair because I didn't have a weekend and my life was so terrible, it did give structure and also regularly interfaced me in particular, I think, with the idea of like God existing and
Yeah.
stories of Christ and whatever miracles happening. And it had a lot of impact on me in ways that are not like, I don't care about the church in and of itself, but that was important. And so, anyway, we found our way into a world now, I think, where we've all kind of, or not all, a lot of us have rejected and struggled with and fought against that upbringing. But there are options for other places to seek that kind of spiritual orientation. We don't have to be atheistic if we're going to abandon the church, so to speak. We can find a way into the sacred on our own terms. But what does that really look like? I think that it can be overwhelming to think about creating a sacred space of your own. And so I want to kind of open us up here and just gently say, I think that we're all on a path of the creation of sacred space. And it is one of the most kind of grounding and vitalizing things that we can do for ourselves in a world that's very mad and very disorganized and disorienting in its style and its expression. So I'd love to hear from you what you think about the creation of sacred space.
Yeah, all of that is really great to start off with. I think you're very, very right. There's something about having that ritual as a child of having sacred space, knowing that there are sacred spaces. And then as adults now, many of us have left formal religion. We've left the church or the temple or whatever. And we're missing something. And this is something that I'm actually very, very passionate about. And I talk to a lot of my students about. I've made videos about this on YouTube, that a lot of people struggle. with their spirituality in our contemporary world. Not because there's a lack of information or a lack of possibility. It's, there's too much out there about how to make your spirituality unique and what elements to bring in, but because there's a lack of authenticity. There's a lack of it feeling like we take it out of the intellectual realm and it becomes moving, it becomes realized. And I think that's in large part because we don't have the sacred spaces, that we don't have the physical buildings or the areas, or even if it's an internal space in some kind of way that says, and now I'm with the sacred. We kind of mix it in with the profane, with the daily life. And so there's no real clear separation. And it's really hard to cultivate a spirituality that honestly feels like it has that sacredness to it. There's a quote that I really wish I had it memorized, but I think it's in The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth. I think it's in the documentary itself, but he's talking about what happens. He's describing the moment of being in St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan, and you're in there, and you're like, "Wow, this is something," and you can just feel the element of God or the sacred experience all around you, even if you're not Catholic or whatever. Like you can see it; it's there. It's like
Yeah.
in your face. And then you open the door and you step out and you're on Fifth Avenue and there's a taxi that's about to hit you in the face and people are screaming and some baby is crying, and there's this sudden like shift that happens, this dramatic shift from that moment of saying I am with God or I am with the divine or I am with something beyond myself to I am in like the filth of humanity and everything is just bleh, and like heavy. And I think that this is something we're just all fighting with in general, is that we're all in that profane space. We're all in this everyday world of uh, emails from stupid people and and dumb things happening and flat tires and all the stuff. And then somehow inside of that, we're like, let me have a sacred moment. How do I get out of this and into that? And we can't go to the church, and we can't, go to the forest, or we can't go where we find the sacredness. So I think this is a struggle for many of us. So I'm really glad we're doing this episode, because this is something that you and I both have thought a lot about and worked a lot on. And I
Mhm.
hope that we can like offer some things today to help people work through that themselves.
Oh, yeah. No, it's so well put. And yeah, St. Patrick's is a great example because, yeah, Fifth Avenue is Fifth Avenue. And it's actually stunning that inside of that church,
Mm,
you can find it's like quiet and like dark and smells damp and, whatever.
yeah.
It just has that church smell. And it is really special. And so, it's like we are looking for a place that can act as a sort of portal to something that is beyond our mundane experience. And so I think that in my particular path, one of the things that I always felt strongly about was having my home feel like it was a kind of
Mm-hmm.
sacred space. And that's definitely hard to pull off when, you're living in like a cramped little apartment and you live with other
Yeah.
people and, you're also living in a busy city or something like that. But one of the first things that kind of called to me when I started practicing any kind of ritual was the casting of the circle as a kind of
Mm-hmm.
signifier of this is a sacred space in this room in which I'm going to light a candle or sit and pray or pull a tarot card or journal or whatever I was supposed to be doing in my like DIY witchcraft
Mm-hmm.
experiments.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that that was never confusing to me or felt weird to do because I believe that we all kind of remember what it was like to be in sacred ritual space. This is one of the oldest behaviors that humankind
Yeah.
in its organized form engaged in, right? We've always cared about ritual and myth actually only existed to very ancient people because it was attached to various rituals of the harvest or other seasonal offerings, or exchanges of power, like the killing of the Sun King and the replacing of the matriarchal rulers and stuff like that. So all of that to say, we as human beings have an orientation to ritual that is natural and that is part of our kind of flow and our rhythm. We naturally seek to make things sacred,
Yeah.
but that has kind of over time definitely, you know, in our post enlightenment world, kind of been dragged out of us. And ritual has been kind of taken away from individuals or private groups and located only in these massive institutions like the Vatican, for example,
Yeah.
where they can be controlled and used to control their people, right? So here I am criticizing the Vatican. I'm going to be struck down, but
Well, you'll be disappeared probably.
I will be. I'll be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of that to say, I think that this is why it's important to talk about what it means to create something sacred, not just because it's like a cool, witchy, fun thing to do, but I believe that in doing it, we get to reclaim something that is actually an essential part of our experience being with our environment and being part of this world and this life. So, yeah, that was a lot, but what do you
No,
think
yeah.
about that?
I think that that's right. It's totally, totally right. I think that there is, it's a fundamental condition of humanity to seek the sacred. And I know that there's a lot of people who argue against that. Um, I don't care.
Not
I believe
here.
it.
Okay, everyone.
I believe it. I think that there is a fundamental need that we have lost in contemporary society for sacredness, and that is not to say it is not an argument to bring back organized religion. I think that organized religion can be very powerful for a lot of people, but that's not our concern today. We're more so talking about like how do we find this space in our lives, this space in the physical reality that allows us to have that connection. And this is something that we've really lost quite dramatically as we have moved more into secular life, as we move more into patriarchy as the religion.
Mm.
Look at me, I'm getting on a soapbox. I'll get off it now. I think that I want to go to Eliade's book because he says so many fascinating things about the whole book is just 4 chapters, and it's basically just looking at the sacredness of space, time, nature, and the sanctified life. And so, in this first chapter on sacred space, he basically tells us that every time we have a sacred space, every time we find ourselves in a place, and as you said, it doesn't always have to be a physical place, it can be a mental or emotional place, though the physicalization of it can really help us. It
Mhm.
can really make it feel more real. We create a cosmogony. Do you say cosmogony or cosmogony?
I think cosmogony,
Right?
but I
Yeah.
don't
Okay.
say it out loud that much, probably only to you, like my partner.
Yeah. Um, the idea is basically like every time we enter a sacred space, we are creating a world. We're not necessarily creating a world of gods. We're not like sitting there and saying, okay, my God is named this and whatever. No, it's not that. You might do that, and that's great. But it has, as he says, sacred space has a cosmological valence. Every spatial hierophany, which is a word he basically makes up to mean like the phenomenon of like having a sacred spiritual experience, or consecration of a space is equivalent to cosmogony. There is this experience of saying, I create this space as sacred, and therefore I create a sense of divinity. I create a
Mhm.
world that has divinity in it. And I want to bring in another quote that he has because I really like this one. Because I think that for most of us, spiritual people, whether you're a witch or non-denominational of any kind or whatever, or even if you're Roman Catholic or something, a lot of us bring in the home, we've made the home our sacred space because we don't have churches and temples that really function for us anymore. So he writes, the house is not an object, a machine to live in. It is a universe that man constructs for himself by imitating the paradigmatic creation of the gods, the cosmogony. Every construction and every inauguration of a new dwelling are in some measure equivalent to a new beginning, a new life. And I like this quote because I think that it applies to, we're not necessarily only talking about building a house, but we're talking about creating the sacred space, the physical sacred space that we need. Every time we create that space, every time we make it, we build it, it is the creation of a new life. It is the symbolizing that creation of a new life, creating the world that we find divinity in. So that might look like having an altar, as you said, like that's something that you've always gravitated towards. It's a little bit harder for me. It's always been actually a challenge for me to create an altar and interact with the altar in a regular way. I tend to create them and then forget about them and not do anything with it. I have some spaces where it's like this figure always sits in this place, or my candle is always here, and that feels good and reliable. But it doesn't always have that real sense of sacredness to it. However, I have, found a way to create the sacred space in the moment that it's necessary. So often what I'll do is if I feel like, okay, I need to pull tarot cards or I need to, sit with myself and process something, I will close the door and just be in the room, take in the elements of the room that I put there because they help inspire that sacredness within me. And just by switching the moment for myself, I kind of do that work that Eliade is describing of like creating the new life, creating the new cosmogony. I'm like, here is my sacred story happening
Mm-hmm.
presently. And I think that can be, something to remind yourself of, even if you struggle like I have with like, altars are hard, or they don't really click all the time for me. Sometimes it's just the mental shift.
Yeah, I think that altars are interesting because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have the altar be a perfect space. And I think that that's kind of a holdover, honestly, from maybe religious ideas that we were raised with, this
Yeah.
idea that this is where we interact with God. And so it needs to be really particular. And what I'll say about that is your whole, if you're doing this at home, and if you're, and not everybody's able to do this, right? Some people have kids that will get into stuff if they leave it around, or they have,
Or pets.
circumstances where they're not really out of, like, they're not out in the open about their
Yeah.
magical practices. And so I'm not saying that this is appropriate for everyone, but I believe that the home space should, unto itself, be a kind of magical place where
Hmm.
we are touching in with the divine in various ways. And it doesn't really matter what your altar looks like, or if it's messy, or if you forget about it, or if you break it down and build another one. Sometimes something as simple as like just leaving out a glass of wine for whatever the household
Yeah.
spirits
I
are
love
that
that you do
protect
that.
you here. Yeah. Just very simple, like very simple things, very simple gestures to whatever is numinous in your space that can come in and support you, I think is a good first step. And so I know what you're saying. I mean, I forget about my altar frequently, and I find myself constantly having to tidy it up or rebuild it, or it's annoying, it gets messy. But I think that that's also symbolic of what it is to be in active relationship with something that is divine and numinous, because we don't have this pristine orientation to, like, our bodies and to the divine, therefore, right? We are messy. The earth and nature is messy and kind of scary. um, we're lied to, basically, in church, and told that God comes through this pure vessel with the particular incense and the vestments and the sacrament and all that stuff. And that's just one way in that has been kind of made official
Yeah.
by a group of people. And so I think that in reclaiming the messiness of our practice, we get to reclaim a lot of what that ritual kind of gives us.
Hmm.
So I do think that that's something that we should consider. And in that vein, there are many different ways that we can be in relationship with sacred space, right? So I'm really interested in my world in thinking about sacred space that is portable and tangible. So something that you can bring with you anywhere, like a journal can be a
Mm-hmm.
sacred space
Mm-hmm.
that you bring with you, or even a particular place in nature, or even a dream practice that you have can be helpful towards cultivating a sacred space that is impenetrable by other people and can't be taken from you, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's like, what are we doing here? I love the idea of the consecration of a sacred space as a cosmogony, the
Yeah.
birth of a new world, the birth of something divine. We have to root that power back into ourselves and say, we can do this whenever we want to. Not that we're so powerful and we're, all almighty, but there is a natural connection with the divine that we have lost and that we can reclaim by
Yeah.
coming into sacred space,
Mm-hmm.
wherever we want to find it. So,
Yeah. All of that is so, so gorgeous. Something that's coming to mind for me, I think that I really loved going to church as a kid. I mean, I hated going to church. What kid likes going to church? It was like very annoying. We used to go on Sunday night, which sucked
mm,
because we'd go to the 5 o'clock mass on Sunday because my mom would just put it off as long as possible. And then when we came back, it'd be 6 o'clock on a Sunday. And then I'd be like, damn it, I have to go to school
yeah, weekends
tomorrow.
over.
It was horrible. But I really liked going on like Easter and Christmas. And I liked when I worked as a cantor in the church for forever. Um, Sometimes I really liked it then too because there was something about like walking into this place that was always cool
Mm,
and always like even when it was dirty, how would it was barely you could tell that it was dirty because it's an enormous stone building, and there was something that just made you suddenly feel like you're in a beautiful place. And I miss that a lot. You know, I've in my adult life, I've searched for churches and institutions where I can go and I can be like, I go here every week or once a month or something, and this feels like it's totally devoted to that. And I think some people need that. I find myself to be one of them. And it's hard because I don't like, um, I just haven't found the right thing yet. But what I will say is that I travel at once a year. This is a very important thing for me. When I was 19, I went to France for the first time and I was like, I'm going to do this forever. I'm always going to go someplace gorgeous. And I'm very, very proud of myself for making that a priority in my life. And I realized recently that every trip I've gone on since I started this, I think I started traveling in 2015, um, has been somewhere that I find sacred. And like I've never like gone on a vacation. It's like occurred to me recently. You know, I went to Wales, which was gorgeous, but I went to like, because Wales has my family's from Wales and it just has all this history and this depth to it. And I went to, the mountains of Switzerland and also, saw the Jung house there, which is, there's a lot of sacredness that I draw from Jung's work. Um, I went to San Francisco and I saw the redwoods, which is probably one of the holiest places I've ever been in my entire life. And
spooky.
it's really amazing. And I realized that I every time I travel, I go out and there's some part of me as I'm planning my trip and being all, anal about like, we're going to do this and this, the other thing. I'm actually planning, I'm seeking out spaces that I know will feel sacred to me. So not everybody, can just be like, I'm going to go on a vacation to somewhere crazy. But I think that there is, even though it's only once a year for me, having that is very, very important in my life because I get to feel like, no, I'm not maybe going to a big church, but I'm like, I'm going somewhere and seeking something actively, powerfully sacred for me, and or discovering the sacred out in the world. And I
Mm,
think that that can be something to kind of reorient it for us as well, is that it doesn't always have to be something that we cultivate that's always there. It can be something that we're looking for, something that we go to find. And maybe that is going out into nature, exploring different things. Maybe that is traveling. Maybe that is even exploring different, works. Like Rilke, for me, when I first read Rilke, felt like a sacred experience as well. And I found a home in that. I felt like I could return to that sacredness when I read his poetry.
Mm.
So anyway, just ideas to explore about what we can mean when we say sacred space, and how we can feel like it's there for us and cultivate it, even if it's not a regular routine thing. Sometimes that's okay. I have a very strong belief that we overuse a lot of our spirituality, that we overuse astrology, and we overuse tarot, and we overuse witchcraft, not because we should be using these things, but because we make them feel profane. We make them feel everyday and ordinary.
Mm.
And I think that that is something that starts to diminish them a little bit. And that's not to say that, like, oh, we can't check our horoscope daily and see what's going on. Not at all. But like, if we're really trying to gather up the depth from these things, there's something that it lends more of that wonder and that depth to our practices, when we can put some space between them, when we can actually reach for them, when it feels like it's part of a ritual, or it really just feels like it's necessary in the moment. I always recommend to my students, please stop pulling tarot cards every day,
Yeah.
especially in my class.
Yeah.
You can if that's your thing, but like, when we slow it down and we find that more sacred element, it has more depth than we expected.
Hmm. I totally agree with that. And I think that it's interesting. I think that that impulse to overuse or overproduce comes from the fact that we feel like we're creating that sacred space for ourselves. And so we're
Hmm.
responsible for maintaining its aura or its essence.
Oh
And
yeah, you're
so
so right.
that's why we have to like go to the altar every day and light the candle and do, for me, for a long time, it was like every day was, to be reading the Orphic hymn to the planet of the day and giving it offerings and all that stuff. And eventually, I personally am at a place now with my practice where I don't feel like I have to do that every day. Not because I'm so great and I'm like like talking to God, but like I feel as though there is this space that has opened up in these initial attempts at connecting that I trust now. I trust now that when I want to light a candle, I am doing so and it has an impact. Or
Mm.
right. So I think that that overuse, the anxiety that comes from looking at the transits every single day when you're learning your astrology and kind of future tripping about what could happen,
Yeah.
it comes from the fact that it's not a top down model of being in relationship with the numinous, which going to church takes the
Yeah.
pressure off because you're just a member of a congregation,
Yeah.
right? So I think that maybe just bringing cognizance to that is really important because we deserve to have a kind of, I think, reverent but easeful relationship with the divine where we find it. We don't need to have anxiety about what we're creating or what we're calling in. And so I think that it's great to set up your practice, establish a routine with it, and then, yes, experiment with pulling back and not pulling a tarot card every day and not looking for ways in which the moon is messing with you or Mercury retrograde is ruining your life. Like, these tools are not here to be prescriptive, but to give us a framework and a reminder that we're held by something that is bigger
Yeah.
than us. And that kind of, we have initiated that personal cosmogony by
Hmm.
opening the door and being curious and being receptive to spirit
Yeah.
in our own sacred space, in our home, in our dreamscapes, whatever it is, right? So yeah,
Hmm.
I think that that's the reason why it gets so overwhelming to people, because we feel like we have to make it ourselves every single time and we're starting
Yep.
from scratch.
Yep.
And that's just something that we need to kind of bring awareness to.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us right back to Eliade's idea that to create a sacred space is to create a new life and a cosmogony, right? And so the idea of creating, when we say cosmogony, we mean the cosmos, the story of the cosmos, the birth of being, the divine experience, right? And I think that as you're saying, every time we come to the altar, we're like, there's a pressure to create it again. And when we go to a church, for example, when we're Christians and we go to mass, it's already created for
Right.
us. We're participating in it. We're going there and reminding ourselves of this world. And so there is this like deep ease in that we know the rules, we know what we have to do, we know who we're expected to be. Sometimes that's stressful and it's not for us, and that's okay too, but the idea is like we go in and we know this is what God is, this is what God is looks like, this is what God expects of me. And so our task is just to figure out our level of participation in that, if we can
Mhm.
bring ourselves to that altar and
Mhm.
really give ourselves to it. But when we're doing it in our homes and we don't have, a specific religious doctrine that we're following, it can be really overwhelming to each time say, well, what are my rules? If I'm praying, like, for example, I have the Black Madonna on my altar because I find that to be a very inspiring figure for me. Am I praying to the Black Madonna? Am I showing reverence to the Black Madonna? Do I pray the rosary to her? Do I just say what I want to say? There's these questions of like, what are the rules? What's the world I'm building around this image, around this central divine figure? And I don't always totally know. And there is, just as you said, there's a pressure for us that's like, oh, we have to know though. Like we have to figure it out. And it starts to become stressful time after time. And I think that we really, really do, as you said, we need to take the pressure off because it's not there's no commentary on how we failed as spiritual beings because we don't know exactly the rules by which we worship the deities we do or have reverence for the tools we use, or we don't need these rules. Sometimes they help, and if you want to create rules for yourself, you of course can, but we're not given them. And I know there's a lot of people who are kind of against the idea of being given doctrines and being given rules, and of course, however, the point of them is to take the pressure off of us to figure out the how we're supposed to live. It's supposed to give us some kind of path, and there is grace in that. um, that's not, I don't want to go back to the church. That's not something I want to do, but I do want to cultivate in my own life the ability to have room for myself to explore and shift. And so creating the sacred spaces doesn't mean that we say this is the world I've built and it's always going to be the same. Instead, it's turning to the altar, or going out into nature, or opening the journal, or wherever we know we find that numinous seed within ourselves, going there and then saying, how do I offer myself today? What feels like it wants to be offered? And in that, we're kind of viewing the cosmogony of our inner psyche, right? And the deeper archetypes that are trying to be expressed and to be met within ourselves, and finding the divine inside that, the numinous inside. And so I think it's a, we're this episode is all about the creation of the sacred space, and something that's coming to me is the idea that it is a creative act every time we go to it, and we go to cultivate it, and seek it out, especially in this new age that we have, that is kind of post formal religion. Um, and so take the pressure off, people.
I love all of
just
that. Yeah.
just be with it and just explore it.
Yep. I think that what's really scary about like getting really deep into astrology or tarot or reading runes or whatever kind of divination you're doing is that you realize that you can have a direct relationship with what is numinous inside of you and your own experience. And that can be like really freak people out because we have all this baggage around the archetypes that come along with, the divine. And it's like people pulling the devil card in the tarot and they're like, oh no, the devil is around. And that's just not at all what the experience of that card necessarily is, although that's a very scary archetype to people and it'll scare people
Mm-hmm.
away from
Scares me.
pulling tarot. Yeah. And so I think another kind of point that I just want to touch on is that space creates a psychological experience or atmosphere. And that
Yeah.
is what being in a temple or a church does for us. enters us into a psychological orientation. Now I am with the divine.
Yeah.
And there is a really interesting book by this philosopher, French philosopher named Gaston Bachelard, and it's called The Poetics of Space. And it's something that I've picked up and put down a lot, but it is extremely cute and cool because he literally talks about the psychological and kind of experiential process of living in a house or living in a space that has meaning. And so he has a chapter on the house as the universe, and he has a
Mm-hmm.
chapter on nests and shells and different kinds of ways of being at home, attics versus basements. And this is, I think, a really cool kind of not necessarily talking about the creation of something divine, but a good reminder of the ways in which space and our homes and our rooms can suggest psychological states to us that can put us in a certain zone. And that's why a lot of times, like, churches will have those like domes, a cathedral
Mm-hmm.
will have these high sprawling ceilings because we're reaching up towards the divine.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
a lot of us are renters and we don't have a spiraling turret within which to practice our craft. And that is completely fine. That's actually why going into nature can be really empowering if that's accessible to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that filling a space in your home, even if it's just a corner of a room, I tell this to my clients who are like, how do I get started with this? Um, Making it so that there are elements of what you're trying to bring in and elements of nature that are going to exist in harmony, that can key you into when I step towards this corner of the room where my altar is set up. I know I've got a glass of water for the water element, a feather for the air element, a candle to light for fire, and a crystal or even a plant for the earth element. That can be something that can help key us into a space where we can then cast a spell or pray or write or even do work if we're doing spiritual work, like,
Mm-hmm.
writing a book or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or writing poetry even. So I think that, again, remembering that if you feel like you're outside of the availability, like, or that it's not available to you rather, to make a sacred space in your home, I think that considering the stress and the responsibility of it and kind of acknowledging that is the first step, and saying, actually, I do get to have my own relationship with something that is really, really sacred, and that is something that I have a right to, is what I would kind of suggest as a starting place for everybody.
Yeah, I love that a lot. I Can I tell you my dream that I
No.
have?
Yes, please. I'm dying. Tell me.
Okay. So I have a little dream in my heart that when I'm an old lady, if I get that far, please, because I'd love to be a crone one day. I think I'd be a great crone.
You're going to be great. You're going to
I'd
do
be
great
so
at
good at
it.
it.
You're going to thrive.
Uh, um, I want to buy like a plot of land somewhere like in the Hudson Valley and build a church. And
Wow.
I want this is like a dream I've had for a long time, and I want to do it partly myself and like I'm young and building the Ballingen Tower. That's a stupidly dumb reference that Jungians will get. Um, I want to like have a community of women come and build this church with me, and I want it to be in the middle of the woods. Like it has to be like very very reclusive, like maybe a parking lot like a quarter mile down the road if there needs to
Mm-hmm.
be one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it has no formal religion except for that the feminine is centered somewhere in it, and that it is just a place where people can come and do whatever they want, and that it can share space with more formal practices and less formal practices and whatever. And this is my old lady dream.
This is amazing. This
I
is
want to
such a
build a
beautiful
church.
expression of your Jupiter moon in Cancer in the sixth house conjunction. This is like the perfect expression of it because your moon conjunct Jupiter says that a part of your psyche that like looks for comfort is oriented to the search for the divine. Jupiter is always a kind of like expression of religion or religious experience. And so the moon Jupiter aligning there in Cancer too, which is a sign that we associate with like women and, the feminine in general. And then the sixth house, like building the church yourself. The sixth house is a place of labor and also service to the community. And so good job you're doing your astrology. And I just couldn't help but dig
I
into
appreciate
that in
it.
my brain. Yeah.
This is why everyone should have a best friend who's an astrologer, just FYI. But that's my dream.
I'll be there
So, yay.
if I make it. I
If we
don't
make
totally
it to the
crack up
crone.
before then.
As I get older, I get more and more. I like have to go to all the doctors. I went to get my physical last week, and she's like, "Okay, you look fine. Everything seems to be fine. When's the last time you went to a dermatologist? I see spots. I see this. I see that." And I was like, "That's a birthmark. No, don't tell me I'm dying." But now I'm always like panicking that it's like, well, maybe life will hit me in the face. And so
Why do
I'm always
Scorpios hate going to the doctor? Just go to the dermatologist. I can't take it. You
I go
people.
to every doctor. I go to all the I will go to the dermatologist. I will do it.
I need to go too, so we can make appointments in the fall together, okay?
Okay.
We're gonna go.
We'll do it. We'll have a pact, dermatology pact.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so I think that that is the dream, and we have made some sacred space here today. We did it.
Nice. I
It
love
was
it.
gorgeous.
Cool. So let's now maybe turn to a symbol.
Yes. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to leave a review or learn more about how you can support us on Patreon, where you can get access to some exciting exclusive offerings. Or you can connect with us by sharing a symbolic experience, whether from a dream or synchronicity, for us to explore on the show. Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience or connect with us on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people interested in all things esoteric? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an ad partner. We offer a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, and we would be delighted to showcase your business and offerings to new hearts and new minds. Simply fill out an advertiser application form at our website, linked in the show notes below, or navigate to sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us.
Looking to ground and enrich your manifestations and release any stagnant or negative energy that may be causing resistance? This could be a great opportunity to receive supportive Reiki and intuitive energy healing from Tangerine Sage Healing. Stephanie creates a serene capsule for Usui and Holy Fire Reiki, intuitive energy healing, and multidimensional intuitive guidance readings for those who are seeking relief and are ready to ground newfound inspiration and abundant manifestation into one's most authentic self and life. Use code Tangerine Sage at checkout to receive 25% off your first session when you book at tangerinesagehealing.com. And I am myself a loyal client of Tangerine Sage. So once you've booked your session, go over to our Instagram at SororMysticAPod and let us know that you've done so, and we'll send you a free archetypal tarot meditation kit as a gift to you. So go ahead and check out tangerinesagehealing.com.
Are you an Oregon resident who's dreaming of finally owning their own home? Whether you're on the hunt for the perfect place to fulfill your cottage witch dreams or simply trying to make an investment to craft your future, Heather Rowe is our top pick for realtors in the state of Oregon. With her expert eye for detail and grounding sensibility, Heather will take the anxiety out of home buying so that you can find your dream home. Find the keys to your sacred space at www.heatherrowe.realtor.
Okay, so we have a symbol, and this one is a series of synchronicities. So our listener says, about a month ago or so, I was working this horrible job that I knew I needed to quit. I was pulling daily cards and did a more in-depth reading to help figure out what was holding me back from leaving, and I was getting so much horse symbolism. Within a week-long period, all 4 knights appeared, as did the 6 of Wands. I had cards from other non-traditional tarot decks, like the 8 of Wands and the 2 of Pentacles, that just so happened to be depicted with horses, and even a few oracle cards, all with horses on them. I read how in many different mythologies, horses are usually seen as initiating these big transitory events. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on horses and horse symbolism. So, horses. What do you think of horses?
I think a lot of things about horses, and I am happy to share my weird horse ideas. So, first of all, yes, horses are absolutely like initiatory, but they have this really weird valence to them where they're these symbols of like strength and power and vitality, and they're very solar, but they can also be very, very lunar. And so
Mm-hmm.
horses are associated with the god Helios, who's like the sun god, but the god Poseidon or Neptune also has a horse as part of his symbolism, but the horses have like fish webs on their hooves instead of
Mm-hmm.
regular hooves, and Helios's horses are like made of fire. And so I think that when we think about horses, we think about motility and we think about a kind of masculine force. But at the same time, they are also very much about the internal psychic realms as
Mm-hmm.
much as they are about the solar. So in our previous episode, we talked about swans and we were talking about the duality of the swan. And I think that horses and swans are one of those animals that have this really rich symbolism attached to them that's about purity and spirit, but also
Mm-hmm.
about something that's really, really occult and just kind of thonic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm not really being very helpful, but that's where I
No,
can
it's
start
great.
us off. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I also like this idea of horses being initiatory. In the tarot, um, the knights, the horse symbolizes movement for the
Yeah.
knights. And I think that that is part of the key of the horse, especially when we're talking about the tarot, that the horse symbolizes, at least in my way of thinking about the tarot, we have the page, which is like the more introverted exploration of the suit, of the function. And then the knight says, how do I bring this out? How do I move this forward in life into the extroverted plane? Like, how do I relate this to the work I do, the people I love, the situations I'm in? And so that the horse is kind of that symbolic movement forward. And then interestingly, in the tarot, we have like the progression of speed with the horses too. And that's one of the reasons why we connect it to movement, because they are at different speeds.
Mm-hmm.
The pentacles are the slowest, and cups, then wands, then swords. Um, and so that's something that comes to me about it, especially because we're talking about the tarot and we're talking about, they saw it in oracle cards and in more non-traditional decks they came up. But in the Rider Waite Smith, which is the system I work out of, that's certainly an element. And then with the Six of Wands, we also have someone on horseback, but it's not about movement as much as it is about victory, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
And like
about the kind of
return, right? Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's an idea of return there. And then the knight on horseback has like, there's something that feels that's really victorious about that image of like, here I am on the horse, I'm taller than everybody else. There's a majesty about it. There's an image of it being like one of power.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and I think that if we consider the context of this symbol, this person is like struggling to leave a job and
mhm.
really feeling frustrated. And so I think that the horse is this emblem of like nobility and power and change. And so, like the elements of discovery or of taking a leap of faith or of finding one's own inner sovereign feels very much like aligned with this.
Yeah.
Whenever we think of horses, I can't help but think of just like knights and kings on horseback and queens, right? But you think
Oh yeah.
about that very sort of medieval sort of culture of the horse being the not only mode of transportation, but also an animal of conquest and exploration
Mhm.
and war and protection, right? Knights riding
Mhm.
on horseback as well, protecting damsels. So I think that it's a really beautiful animal to come through, almost like a daimonic figure. And so, what I would always recommend when we have these kind of creatures that show up again and again is to like get yourself a little figurine of a horse or
Yeah, for
a
sure.
picture or something like that, pin it up on your wall, and keep speaking to it, especially in dream contexts, and letting it show you what it wants to show you is a
Mhm.
good idea.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know where I got that idea from of getting like a figurine before you, before I met you? When I started my analysis, my Jungian analysis, when I was like, I think I was 23 or 24, um, I had crazy dreams about animals. I dreamt of alligators and wolves and snakes, and just
Oh,
it was very archetypal. And so, so my analyst at the time was like, "You gotta collect these." And so she sent me out, and I went to the craft store, and I bought a toy set of little animal, like zoo animal figurines.
oh,
And anytime I had a dream about a new one, I'd put the new one on my shelf, and it
that's
was
so
just like I had a
funny.
little menagerie of archetypal animal friends. So horse, I would for sure say go get a horse statue of some kind, even if it's a 99-cent one from, the dollar store. And hold that image. I really think, as you said in the beginning of this, that you had a horrible job that you knew you needed to quit. You didn't necessarily mention whether you quit it or not,
Hmm.
whether that has moved forward. But certainly the horse imagery to me feels like it's, for me personally, it's less about initiation as it is just about the
Mhm.
movement forward. And as you said, like the nobility of it too, the sovereignty. What's the name of the deck when we went to the Morgan Pierpont
Is it the
Museum?
Visconti Sforza?
Not that one. We looked at the other one, the KG Yale. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Right?
Carrie? Carrie?
Carrie Yale. That's where it is.
Yeah.
Where did I get KG from? Is that a Freudian slip?
I was gonna say, ask
Am
yourself.
I cagey? The Carrie Yale. Yeah. So in that one, they have mounted knights and mounted ladies.
Hmm.
And so the mounted aspect is giving them some kind of respect and
Hmm.
authority, right? And
Hmm.
so the being on horseback is like, I have the power. There is something, you respect me, right? So I think that there is that element too of how do you get on the horse and garner that respect. That's very Six of Wands energy too.
Yeah, I think too, like the fact that all four of the knights came through in card pulls for this person.
Yeah.
How would you orient them in like the court card spread? Like, I know that you have ideas about stages of being from
Mhm.
page to king. So what do you think the knights are doing there?
The nights to me are the development of the function into the extroverted plane, but it's not at its full maturity yet. So I would say if I were to pull that reading for somebody and pull four nights, I'd be like, wow, you're really stuck in this period, this like phase of extroverted development. Like you're really
Mm.
trying to, when we say extroverted, we don't mean like I like to go to parties. Have I told you that I was talking to one of my friends, like my good friend of like 15 years, and I was like, I'm an introvert. And he was like, You're not. That's ridiculous. And I was like, I am absolutely the classic, most classic introvert of all time. And he was like, You are the life of the party every time we go to a party. You're the one who wants to stay out late, and you're the one who wants to do the crazy things. And I'm like, Yeah, because I'm a weird, socially uh, hungry person who is locked up in my apartment all the time, but I'm very much an introvert because that has nothing to do with it. Just
Well,
so
people
people
get
know.
confused. Yeah, your
Yeah,
preference is to be in
it's
your
about the
world.
flow of energy,
Hmm.
exactly. So does
Totally.
the energy flow from towards the outer world? Like do I focus my energy towards the outer world, or do I feel like I'm pulling the energy into the inner world?
Right.
And for the most part, because we're not only one or the other, but for the most part, I really prefer to pull the energy into my internal universe. That's where I feel most centered. My husband, for example, is very much an extrovert. He's like,
Hmm.
where am I in the world? How
Hmm.
do I fit in? So that's just how we orient that.
Hmm.
But when we're in that stage with the knights, it is figuring out, how do I pull myself into the world? How do I move my life forward in a way that's not just in my internal kind of mental state, but in a kind of actualized way? How do I make that progression forward? And so with all the suits, so we're in all the territories. We're in thinking and feeling and intuition, which is kind of like a way of saying inspiration, and sensation, which is saying like, how do we make things practical and real? So I would say, yeah, that's very much the stage. And so that might be why it's so tight and hard to do because there's a lot of parts of you that are engaged at moving forward at once with this moment for you in your life. So those are some
Beautifully
thoughts.
put. I knew you would have something good to say about that. So yeah, that's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, you know what? I hope that the horse leads you to the next phase of your life, wherever that is supposed to take you. And thank you for sharing that. And just a reminder for people that we would love for you to leave us a little review wherever you listen to your podcast, or share the podcast with a friend. You might have a friend that would like this podcast. That would be cool. And yeah, you can also check out our Patreon, which is on our all the links are in the stuff wherever the links are going to be
In the show notes.
in the show notes.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining our Patreon.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Christina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.